All righty. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up today, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I'm pleased to present two of the smartest and most accomplished people I've ever had the pleasure of presenting on this platform, and I promise you will leave today thinking, wow, who knew? And you'll also leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. First, before we get started, I want to take care of some business. To the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. And in this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones, and ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the conversation. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brew Works, Project Music, and Better Than Booze. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome back David Hughes. David has 25 years of experience in online distribution. He began at Sony Tokyo before moving in 1998 to Sony Music in New York, where as VP of Technology Strategies and Digital Policy, he created and ran the industry's first online distribution department. David's responsibilities included the creation of the business and technical infrastructures required to enable mass online distribution. In 2006, David joined the RIAA in Washington, D.C., where for 15 years he represented the major recording companies' technology interests. As CTO, his responsibilities included coordinating the development and promotion of technical standards, emerging technologies, and new formats. Since April of 2021, David has been a strategic business and technology consultant. His clients include the RIAA, Sound Exchange, Jaxsta, Song Sleuth, and Switchchord. He's also a founding member of AI OK, an initiative formed to provide an equitable approach to using AI in the music industry. David has contributed numerous formats and standards, including MPEG, DVD audio, SACD, Blu-ray, ultraviolet, ISRC, ISNI, and DDEX. He's been active in the promotion of high-res and immersive music. David has a BA in honors in East Asian Studies from the University of Alberta and a Master's of Management Science degree from the University of Tsukuba, Japan. He is a member of the Audio Engineering Society and the Recording Academy, sits on the National Recording Preservation Board, and is an inventor of over a dozen patents. Did I mention that he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met? Welcome, David. Glad to have you back, brother.
Thank you, Tom.
And joining David as today's featured guest is Dr. Martin Clancy. Martin is a multi-talented musician, author, artist manager, and AI expert. He is a founding member of Irish rock band in Tua Nua and a certified Ableton 11 live trainer. He chairs the IEEE Global AI Ethics Arts Committee, serves as an IRC Research Fellow at Trinity College Dublin, and authored the book Artificial Intelligence and the Music Ecosystem. He manages Irish singer Jack Lukeman and is a leading voice in advocating ethical use of AI in music. Martin's music career started as a co-write of Take My Hand with Sinead O'Connor and includes 2 top 40 hits on the Billboard dance charts. He performs with the melodic techno group Valferon and electronic jazz ensemble Embassy Gutters. He's an in-demand speaker, having addressed the United Nations, European Union, University of Oxford, Queen Mary University of London, and many more. He's also been featured in various publications and radio shows, most recently appearing on the BBC Radio, CGTN America, Moncrief with Sean Moncrief, and Your Morning Coffee podcast. It is an honor to welcome these two rock stars to our platform. Please take it away, boys.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Nice to see you again, David.
Yes.
How are you feeling? You're feeling
I'm
it bad?
better. I am better. Yes, Martin. I did have laryngitis a couple of days ago. I got my voice back. So now I know a number of my friends who are probably joining today who wish I'd still had laryngitis, but we're here, and we're here to talk to each other. So I'm going to start by saying, just to tell the folks about us. So Martin, you and we met about a year and a half ago when you were writing your book, Artificial Intelligence in the Music Ecosystem. You were kind enough to interview me and include me in your book, which was great. It came at a great time, just when I was personally becoming really interested in AI and thinking seriously about how it was going to impact the future of our industry. And and so we started off at first, I guess we would talk like once a month, and then it became once a week. And
we met in person for the first time last week.
We met in person for the first time last week and spent, I don't know, 10 hours a day speaking with each other for 5 days in a row, which is why I lost my voice.
Yeah.
But I think the folks would like to, a little more about you. Tom gave you an introduction, but, you've been a professional songwriter and a musician, accomplished recording artist. You were signed to U2's label. You've done the audio engineering kind of stuff, although we'll come back to that. Produced, managed artists. You've promoted big arena events. You've sort of done everything in the music industry, but then at the same time, you're a technology instructor. You're an academic. You've got a PhD from one of the top universities in Ireland. It's like, whoa, how did that, how do you go from co-writing songs at 14 with Sinead O'Connor to having a PhD from Trinity College, Dublin in AI, music, and ethics? So try to just connect the dots for us. I talk to you every day and I still have no idea about most of your life. So I'm as interested as the audience.
Okay, I'll do this. We're going to make sure that we keep this to like 2 minutes as we go, right? So no shady dog stories.
We'll keep you on track.
In one sense, it's depressing when you think about all those things, what one does. But let's take a different tact and consider what might link them. Probably curiosity. So I'm not particularly technically minded, but I do like to know how things work. And that curiosity, that's probably the part that's linked me from for all the stuff that I'm involved in. I find music and writing songs that there's a kind of not synesthesia like we see colors and things, but that kind of abstract approach to it is the same with music business contracts and trying to put on a big show like that. I was last year the week I launched a book in Stockholm, I had the biggest show that I'd ever done as a manager in Dublin, which was like a 5,000 seater venue in Ireland. And the only way I can stay sane in doing those kind of activities is to see them with the same kind of open-hearted curiosity and be thankful for the help of others. So what does that mean? That helps me with AI. And that really is where I teach. So I teach a thing called Ableton, and Ableton's like one of the 3 main doors. I came back to that because in my 40s, I found that I was an artist in residence in New York and I was back making music. So I was making electronic dance music that kind of took off, to my surprise. And I was using this software. And when I came back to Ireland, I started teaching it. And my students would be, perhaps like a lot of our listeners, industry pros and people from lots of different backgrounds. And that was good fun. But when AI technologies that were called AI appeared, I noticed their opinions started changing, their reactions started changing. And that got me into going, what does this mean? And that's the link to the present day. Like when we speak about AI, what is it we're speaking about? And why is it different than other technologies?
Right. Excellent. So,
And that's kind of how we met as well, because
yeah,
like the book came out of the PhD research, and the RIAAA recommended that you were somebody who could speak about these things. And then we started talking about that. And I had written about you in my PhD. That's where I first came across you. Maybe we could reverse roles here a bit and tell us a little bit about, I think it was 2019 or 2020, I came across you at a WIPO, and then there was a US copyright summit that you were speaking at.
Yeah. So that's sort of how I got really pulled into this. I've always been interested in AI. I mean, come on, all the way back to 2001 and HAL and data and, you know, all the sci-fi stuff. We don't have time to talk about Colossus, the Forbin project today, but
That's right. Yeah.
But around 2019, it started to really come to my attention that this is going to happen. And, you know, we had a conference at the Patent and Trademark Office here in DC. And then a year later, the US Copyright Office and WIPO held this conference on artificial intelligence and copyright. And we had a few sessions set aside for music specifically at that. And I think that's what you're referring to. I gave a presentation about what, you know, sort of what would the impact of AI be on the music industry? And in a nutshell, I basically said any job that requires industry expertise or creativity is going to be impacted. And that was, I don't know, 3.5 years ago or something.
I seem to remember as well, you're talking about the fact that you mentioned that you were a lot of your friends, you said the ones who were close to retirement, you were happy about for them because.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I do have some serious concerns about what this means for the industry. We're going to come back to the pros and cons of this. But I did say, you know, like, luckily, a lot of my friends, hopefully by the time the shit really hits the fan, you know, some of them will be retired. But I had grave concerns really for the next generation, which is how we ended up talking, I guess, about 1.5 years ago about your AI OK project, which we'll come back to, which is really about equitability and sustainability, and how do we make sure that people who create music actually get paid for creating music and not get sidelined by technology. But we'll come back to that. Maybe before we do that, we can just talk a little bit about
well, I was going to ask you, one of the things was that I think I remember you said it was 3 things about technology that were coming that you should watch out for. And then you disingenuously, if you don't mind me saying that, because you can at times be slightly disingenuous with your sense of humor. We should point that out for anybody who's not familiar with that, is that you said there were 3 pieces of technology, and that was AI, and AI. So what did you mean by that kind of rhetoric?
Oh, yeah. So I'm not sure. I think that was a later conference, but I think that right now that's what it is. There's only 3 things that matter, and it's AI, and AI. And that's generative AI, which we're going to talk about, you know, specifically the creation of music, whether it be melodies or sound recordings or anything in between. The second part is sort of how AI, going back to my earlier comments, will impact every single job in the industry. And then the third one is the impact, or maybe we should say relationship, between AI and copyright.
Oh, that's good.
And that's the one that we cannot forget. I think most of the people on this call have been in the industry for a long time. We've got some young people too, but we can never forget that our music industry as a business, now, if you're a hobbyist, that's a different story. But if you are in music industry to make money, it is fundamentally based on copyright. And whatever happens in the courts, legislation, regulation, whatever happens with AI is going to impact the future of our industry. And that's the one that we really have to pay attention to, I think.
I like the word relationship with AI. It's a complicated relationship.
It's a complicated relationship.
And,
Yeah.
and probably best that there is no divorce proceedings or separation, which is, again, something that is possible. So, you know, we should look at that in this course of this.
Right. But
So
I think
why don't we do this? Because it is a bit weird having seen you in person, you know, and now being stuck back here with this. So why don't we do this? If you start throwing a few questions,
yep.
and keep us track, right?
Yep.
And then I'll riff off on a few bits and pieces, and we can bring in, we'll keep an eye on this chat. So everybody we can see what you're writing, just if you think of something that you want to ask us, just throw it in the chat there, and we'll try to add that to the conversation.
We'll try to roll it in. It's a little.
Any insights on AI on the music picture industry, please share. Yeah, actually, we'll come. We can't put everything till we come later, but there is a good connection there. And thanks, Andy, for that. We were talking a bit. I saw that message earlier, and so I have some thoughts on that. But let's talk about music first of all, and then we can expand it into.
Yeah, let's sort of talk about the elephant in the room for this conversation. I think that some of the people, maybe many of them, tuned in today, so to speak, because they're seeing AI in the news every day, all the time. And, you know, front of page, you know, above the fold, as they used to say in the newspaper industry, we see fake Drake and stuff like that. So why don't you talk about, not specifically or generally, about this sort of what what you and I have been calling fake Drake, and what it means, what you think it means for the industry.
That's a nice, skin off nice and simple. Okay. So
and in 2 minutes or less, Martin.
Okay. So fake Drake. Well, fake Drake's a good place to begin, because in many ways that's the apotheosis of so many of these other strands. So we should look at, first of all, to consider that when we're speaking about AI, it's shorthand for generative AI. So we're talking about music that's generated, because AI in other parts of the music industry is equally important. We can't forget to talk about that. So we are talking about music that's been generated by AI. So the big change that occurred, and this is where we're going to bring us into looking at fake Drake. Let's have a look. How we break him down. Okay, so let's break it down. So first of all, what we're looking at here is something that wasn't made by a corporation. This is the first thing that I think is interesting about fake Drake. So this is kind of more, has that Napster feel about it. So this is at that time, it was the record industry against teenagers in their bedrooms, file sharing. That kind of mythological, and of course you have Piracy Bay and all the other large torrent sites above that. But in this regard, what's very interesting there is the fact that this didn't come from any startup particular. This is just people having fun and posting material, and the quality of that material. So first of all, there was a bit of a conversation about, can you tell the difference between Drake and not Drake? Well, I think I was referring to the idea that if it sounds like a Drake and walks like a Drake, it's probably not going to be Drake, and that's the world that we're entering into. Anything to do with the questions of quality, I think we should put to one side. A good example of that we can see.
I'm assuming, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm assuming you're going to talk about quality here, because that's just a matter of time. Yeah,
and also a matter of taste. But if we look at the idea of quality, what we can see, if we look at text to image generators, back in many eons ago, back in the last summer, when we were beginning to start seeing the rise of DALL-E 2 and the popularity of Stable Diffusion, a general thing was, I can tell the difference, but, it's not great with fingers. And then it started getting very good with fingers, and it started getting very good with pretty much everything. And that technological development, for the sake of argument, is probably one that we should assume that it not only is it going to be as good as the real thing, but it's likely to be better than the real thing. And that's an interesting point. And we can touch on that a little bit if you like. Not that it's better in the sense that it's something that you would prefer to have, but it's a different step. Yeah.
Yeah, you had a quote about that I was going to ask about later. So maybe we come back to that.
Okay.
But yeah.
You just frozen.
I want to go to this, drill that. I think there is a difference between, talk about the user-generated, use the term UGC for now. In a sense, uploading a sound recording that was made by a major artist who's signed to a major label is quite different here than this really is the user generating the content. Now, we're going to talk about training materials and what it's made from and so on, and the legal aspects of that in a few minutes here. But I think that your point that this is not coming from a corporation. In fact, we're not even sure that people are doing this with commercial intent, are we?
Well, business as usual. From an artistic perspective, most artists aren't really doing it for commercial intent. They start off doing something they love. They may have a hope of one day, getting the pink Cadillac. But generally speaking, it's fun. If you can leave the day job, that would be great. These days, if you can only have 2 other jobs, that's making it in the music business. So I think that the motivation is the same. Again, it's curiosity, it's doing something new. It's like repurposing technology, again, is a key part. I know as Howie's on the Howie Singer is on the call, and we should plug his new book, which is coming out in September. You've read it, I haven't, but he charts the history of technological disruption in the music industry. And a key part of that, has always been the repurposing of musical instruments. So I think we were chatting as well the weekend about that connection, like for instance, where something like the saxophone would have been a joke instrument and ends up in junk shops. A lot of the music development that we've seen with new instruments has often come from things that were discarded. The 808 drum machine is a great example. So the fact that this technology is accessible, fun, and simple to use is a real goal towards making people want to experiment with it.
That's great. And that experimentation is part of, we want to talk today about the pros and cons of AI and generative AI in particular. And that's part of it, that it's exciting and it's fun and it's new, and people will create new stuff that was not possible to create before. And that's great. But at the same time, there are the concerns, right?
Yeah.
So one of the concerns that we should talk about is, to create this track that sounds like Drake, in order to do that, you actually have to use Drake's voice. And presumably these people did not get permission or a license or anything else to do that. And that opens a whole different conversation, both legal, moral rights conversation, all kinds of things, right? So in sort of, I don't want to say, in the wake, even though the wake wasn't really fully made yet, in the wake of Drake's wake.
I know.
Yes, Martin and I do a lot of bad puns. That's part of what you have to put up with. So in Wake's Drake, we see Grimes, another Canadian. So I'm Canadian for those who don't know, and Drake, and now Grimes comes along and she says, hey, that's great. Ask me for my permission and use my voice and give me whatever she said, half the money, and we're all good. And what do you think about that? And
Well,
what's your gut tell you about that statement, and then the implications for the industry?
Okay. So what we have to do here is we have to change hats. Okay. So in fact, it's a good idea that you stay as Mr. Record Industry, and then I can bounce around and try and do all the other multiple parts in this wide cast of characters. Okay. So if we, at the moment when we're talking there, I was thinking about it from the point of view of fun innovation, do you know what I mean, where this technology would be good. I wasn't thinking about it from the point of view of being a manager or being a record label or even trying to make a living from it. So if we look at Grimes, what do we have? Well, the first thing that's probably noticeable about that is that with the speed of change, how long it took someone to see that as being an opportunistic moment. It took nearly a week till a major artist saw that there was a major marketing opportunity to present this other position. And that's pretty much what it is in relation to that. Half of the money, well, if I put on a record company hat, I'll be going, what money? Like, what's the money? Where's that? Like, what's the half of the money if something has been put up freely, it's not being commercially released? That also goes to the heart of this music being in competition against existing normal forms of releases. So that there's a strand there that we have to consider as well. Is this going to be like a bootleg market of material that is not monetized? And there's a whole series of significant implications if that was to occur, if it's kept outside of the traditional model of the music industry. So I think
it creates a kind of a parallel gray market or something.
Yeah, like Napster did. You know, if something isn't brought inside of the tent, and that if we want for a simpler way of describing that, the industry tent is the industry that was being born on copyright. And further to your point, I absolutely agree about that. I mean, the music industry, which we can identify as pretty much being created in the 20th century, does four things. You write a song, you record the song, you play the song live, and you may sell a t-shirt related to the song. And of those four areas, that's the business. All the rest of
so you're thinking that this ancillary market, Martin, is something akin to other merch.
Well, I think that was the other merch was one of the ways I thought about NFTs. You might remember them. It was like a long time ago.
Trying to forget.
Well, no, I think NFTs were, but there's a great opportunity there that was missed because of speculation. But we can talk about that, and I hope that doesn't happen with AI. In terms of it being separated, if it's brought into the tent, that's the key part. Like, you know, this is where the industry is going to have to react to these new technologies. There's usually three ways of dealing with that we've chatted about. You know, you litigate, please stop. You know, you legislate, going, it's against the law, or you license, saying, let's have a share of the action, like Grimes is suggesting. And I think that what was interesting about that is that there are a number of artists who will be curious about that, but that requires a structure and an understanding. Right now, what we do have is a lot of music being trained, just as we saw with visual arts, where no one's getting paid. And that's, you know, the famous example is Greg Witowski, who's a Polish graphic designer, who became the most, you know, popular prompted artist back in September. And suddenly works of his very distinct art forms were all over the internet, and you couldn't tell the real thing from an original. So, right. You know, we need to learn from that. We really do.
Yeah, we do. I mean, this is a rare occasion where, although I really do think the music industry is going to end up being the canary in the coal mine, we actually had a little canary ahead of us. And we got to see a glimpse of how this is going to impact us. And that's nice, because in the previous disruptions that happened, peer-to-peer being, you know, perhaps the biggest one, the music industry didn't have a canary. They were the canary in the coal mine. So, but let's go back there just a little bit. I think that when these happen, you talked about legislation and licensing and litigation and the different paths that copyright holders can take to try to defend their copyrights and ensure their future business and so on, and the value of their company, something we can talk about later maybe. But I think that one thing we did learn, coming back to Napster, is that the threats are going to come hard and fast. They're going to come quickly. And all those other things you talked about, legislation takes time, regulation takes time, even licensing takes time, and litigation. You know, when we entered into the Napster lawsuit, we thought that we would, you know, we were looking for an injunction. We thought that they would be shut down in a matter of days. We thought it was so obviously intended for piracy. And that was 16 months. And during that time, we had a whole generation learn how to get their music for free. And then, of course, we had the other peer-to-peer, you know, and it went on and on. And it took us years to adjust and take advantage of these new technologies, streaming and stuff. But
if you want to talk about
my concern is that's my concern, and I want to know what you think about that, which is, you know, is the industry going to get T-boned? Is it going to get blindsided, or going to get slammed first, and then the opportunities are going to come much later? Or do you think there's opportunities here?
Well, let's have a look historically, okay? So it doesn't sound like there's any dystopian vision trying to be promoted, but let's have a look. My take on what occurred with Napster, and it's not mine alone, I think this is general common wisdom, is that you had the peak of the music industry with CDs. There was a way of generating the maximum amount of income from that technology. The consumer was happy with that technology. That's one of the things Scott Cohen mentions in the book. Like nobody was unhappy with CDs. We were all happy. Consumers were happy with CDs. So again, it's not consumer demand that pushes these changes. What we do see is that the difference between the time of innovation and the time of social adoption of technologies often changes. And what is appearing now to us is that window has closed. So we'll pause on that for a second. Let's just go back to Napster and that period of time. One of the interesting things that I've observed, certainly in the conversation, I've had many with industry figures who went through that period, is how often new technologies were presented to the record industry going, hey, would you like to do this? For instance, one person was telling me about that they had this idea for ringtones. They went to the labels and said, hey, we got ringtones. And they couldn't believe the complexity of licensing for that. And the list goes on. Basically, every part of the technologies there were originally offered to industry. What's particular, and you can understand why the reluctance would be there, because business was good. Artists, the business was at its peak. What's different now? What's different now is that we can also see that loophole that existed, which, you know, Section 230 in America, what we call Article 13 in Europe, all based around the DCMA and Safe Harbor. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows what that means. Did something sorry, David, you've went there?
Yeah, the US copyright law, the DMCA and the Safe Harbor, right? Yeah.
And the part that I find very curious about that I think we do need to learn from, is that in that kind of King Canute pushback, you know, no bootlegging of our no take down, put down type approaches, what occurred was that an interpretation of the law, and that was a new law, not like a copyright law, appeared in which other companies, you know, young startup companies such as a company called Facebook and Google, were able to reinterpret, and found that suddenly they could broadcast content. And effectively what occurs is that those companies became very, very big. And as a result, what we have is people who are outside of music suddenly becoming some of the chief arbitrators of the shape of music. That's okay now because it's been to a degree readjusted, and big tech is now part of the music industry. But I don't think we're going to get that length of time. ChatGPT's popularity showed us how quickly, you know, we all want this technology. You're on mute, David, I think.
Sorry, I'll stop muting. Just remind me how fast ChatGPT took off.
Well, ChatGPT took off in this, it was the weekend of Thanksgiving, I think. GPT was well known, but there was no real way of basically sticking in your browser and typing in a text. You needed a bit of coding. And I think within a week, it had like a million people had signed up for it. Then all the money came in from Google, from Microsoft. 100 million were then using it. Then they brought in a charge model, so you could, and these other quick variations, and it just became the thing, like where we are now.
Yeah. So I remember at the time, because you and I had this conversation going back, I don't know, a year and a half, which was the question that I kept asking you, which was when is the AI shit going to hit the music industry fan? And I remember when we first got back after the sort of Thanksgiving break, and I asked you again, and I said, well, it looks like it's going to happen in 2023. And you said to me, like I was an idiot, well, of course it's going to be 2023. The only question is, it going to be the first or second quarter?
Yeah. And the big surprise about that now is that what we saw, and it still holds true, is that what we saw was that the way it was going to run was text to image generators, then text to video to film, and then text to music. The text to music ones that appeared first of all were just like a couple of students kind of giving you an indication of what was occurring. And we should talk a little bit about how that technology works, because I'm looking at Tim's question in the chat there about regurgitating what is fed to the system. I'd like to talk a bit about that, because it's not necessarily as straightforward as that, and approaches sentience. Yeah, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. But I think everybody can see the question. It's a great question. So the idea was, what the game player for me that appeared and thankfully was stopped and does relate to copyright was Google's LM model, LM music. And I would suggest that anybody who's interested should go and have a look at that. We might find a link to that and put it into the chat. That was not made public. So that was just tested and shown, demonstrations were given. And the reason for that was that 1% of that, further to Tim's point, was that 1% was actually definitely copyrightable, infringed material. However, that pause is about as long as the music industry has, really. And thank you, Arthur. There you go, Google Music ML. The approaches that you'll hear there, we should talk a little bit about how this music is constructed. Do you mind if we do that, just to contextualize it?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we used to speak about, AI music, it was really about the kind of classical ways that you would probably teach a child music, right? So you teach the rules of music, and in most regards, it would either make initially sheet music or then MIDI music, that then a human would basically process. And a lot of that is similar to the ways that convenience cooking, for instance, do you know what I mean? Like, yes, it's great to make pesto, but sometimes if you go and you get it, someone's already done the pine nut thing with the right basil and blah, it's just as easy to use, but you're going to then have to cook the rest of the meal. And the people who made that pesto, well, they were, certainly in the branding, were Italians who had been trained in the hills, who's picked it themselves and all that kind of mythology. When it comes to AI music, it was a similar approach to how humans were taught. Now, where the big change, at least for me, was with DeepMind, and we should mention who DeepMind are. DeepMind are a company that's owned by Google. Demis Habbis is the CEO, and they're the people behind AlphaGo, AlphaZero, the ones that are very famous at this point. But they're also very closely involved with AI for audio, so text to image, for bots for answering the phone, or chat bots for call answering services, that kind of area. So audio, very much there. And they created a piece of technology called WaveNet. And they said, well, okay, why don't we teach it? Let's do some music. And in the time-honored tradition of artificial intelligence, they said, so we'll get the rules. So I imagine this big rule book of classical music, and the AI would work its way through the class. And then for some reason, they said, somebody made the observation and said, well, what if we don't do that? And what became interesting then has developed into what we now call unsupervised machine learning. And that's what happened with AlphaGo, where effectively you pour in raw audio, you let the machine work it out, and then it interprets it through very unique pathways, which are black box, which means nobody has a clue what's going on, which is, again, like a lot of things that we speak about in the history of music, we go, what's that noise? Like this time we recognize the noise because the noise sounds very like Drake, or it sounds very like Frank Sinatra, but it starts generating new compositions and recordings. And that's further to the point that's made earlier about regenerating past things. This is not sampling. And certainly the sampling is not in any way comparable to sampling that we're familiar with in as a music practice. So we do have new compositions and new recordings. And that's where it gets kind of very interesting, because there's no limit to how much of that can be generated. And if we add that to the quality, you know. Open the pod doors, please, Al. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Open the iPod bay doors, and that doesn't have to be dystopian. You know what I mean? A lot of, we must always remember when we speak about this that our approach to this is nothing like Dylan going electric. You know what I mean? Like that's that kind of outrage of authenticity. I think what's much more interesting here as well is there was a nuanced approach to dealing with AI. So we've gone from, oh God, it's finished, to a lot of people this week, maybe next week could be dystopian again, looking at positive ways that this can be used. The key thing is, how do you make this economically viable? I know it's a bit more than 2 minutes, but we're getting warmed up.
Right. And
doesn't have to be dystopian.
My friend John Strom just says it doesn't have to be dystopian, and it doesn't. So maybe we talk, because we're already almost 3/4 of the way through our time, and there's lots of stuff we want to talk about.
Let's do some fast ones.
Okay, let's do some fast ones. Bjorn, again, you interviewed the ABBA folks about their project, and they had some interesting things to say.
Yeah, I think the Bjorn Again phenomena is a good way, especially as a fake Drake scenario, if we look at that. Now, the avatars, the reason this is interesting is last week, Bjorn celebrated the millionth ticket sold. Apparently, I haven't seen the show. Now, you can see, strictly speaking, it's not AI, but again, you've got holograms with a live band, and AI is part of this whole new way of seeing things. He said that he couldn't believe the success of this. They're going to be doing new material, and he imagines that avatars will go on after the artist is dead, and that's the way of the future. That was his quote, and I think that that's pretty much what we're looking at. So whether or not we want that, I mean, what's interesting is
we're gonna have 565 volumes of Bob Dylan bootleg series.
I think we're nearly close to that already, and he's still around.
So maybe we'll hit 5,000.
And they're successful. I mean, and some of those new bootlegs or those official bootlegs are very good, but not everybody, as we know, is Bob Dylan. So there is a concern. There was also a concern about legacy artists, you know, the popularity of them. The question of what that will mean if they are immortal, effectively, is something we need to consider.
Yeah, no, that's brings us to another question, though. It seems like you mentioned something to the effect that the AI can keep producing. So if AI can outperform in terms of volume and theoretically make songs that are as good or better than the stuff that it was trained on, let's say as good, because I'm sympathetic to somebody's comment about derivative. Yeah. I think that, you know, I don't know how you escape the threshold of the stuff you've been trained on, but what does that mean for performers? I mean, I'm sorry?
By blending it, you know,
What?
that I think, you know, a bit of Drake with a bit of Miles Davis, and you start getting into these very strange combinations.
So you think that almost like the same way that we're using Chat GPT prompts, people are going to figure out new combinations by combining, as you said, this style with this artist, with this style of lyrics, with this vocal, and coming up with new unique combinations.
Absolutely. Where I got into this, one of the things that kind of blew my imagination, Gil Weinberg from Georgia Tech has a robot called Simon, and I saw it doing giant steps in Berlin, and it was quite impressive. It's a 4-armed vibraphone playing robot, and I'll put its name into the chat there. But at one point he just went, okay, and now what we're going to do is let's dial in a little bit more. We've got 70% monk. Let's bring in 40% bird and see what the improvisation differences are. I went, holy God, how is this possible? I'm a huge jazz fan, and to have that idea of those improvisational moments from those kind of artists, that they could be somehow put into a bottle and put into a robot, kind of made me go, okay, we've got to, whether or not that works, that process is revolutionary and terrifying to me at that point.
Okay. Well, somebody, Adam had a question in, you know, the similarities basically to derivative works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you made a comment about black box. So if it's going through a black box, we may not be able to determine what it's a derivative of, unless the system that's creating it also creates a report of what it is a derivative of.
Yeah.
And that's part of my concern. Sure, you know, you could make a very strong case if you're Universal Music, for example, that, hey, that's Drake's voice. We own all his sound recordings. You must have trained on his sound recordings to do this. You need a license or whatever their negotiation is. But once it gets more and more subtle, unless we have a 23andMe that says this is 7% Drake and 2% Eminem and 4% Adele and 2% John Coltrane, how are we going to even know how to divide the money, even if the industry catches up? Which is another problem that somebody mentioned in the chat, which was, and I made a note here. Yeah, I mean, our business wasn't set up for ringtones, as you mentioned. The same way that artist contract from 10 years ago wasn't set up for augmented reality. You know, we don't have best practices and artist deals to deal with all of this new stuff, which is sort of why I asked you about the Grimes comment, which is, you know, if she controls her stuff and she doesn't have to deal with label, maybe she can figure it out. She's got clever lawyers and good business partners. But we need a system that works for the industry. And this is going to be really complicated, right?
There's a couple of specific questions we should address, because we did ask people to, and I've been watching, but so let's just take this idea of substantial similarity. Okay, so if we look at, can we do a 2-minute one on copyright law for a second?
Sure, let's go.
Let's have a look at our fundamentals. Okay, so fundamentals, creativity and originality. They're the two things that we think of in that are key in creating a new work of art. Creativity in music has a pretty low bar. Feist is the standard. Feist, for anybody who doesn't know, is a phone book, I think out of North Dakota or some part of America, which said there's a modicum of creativity was involved. That has an interesting twist. Earlier this year, a graphic comic was by that same US Copyright Office, had its copyright removed in these images because they were made by a company, made through a system called Midjourney, and the ruling, or the revised ruling, said that there was not sufficient creativity involved in using, there's too much chance involved. It's clearly
That's the graphic portion of this graphic novel.
But the point is that what all that really revealed was, and no disrespect to the administrator who did that review, that they hadn't used Midjourney and had no idea of how detailed the work is when you're using prompts, especially when they cited Feist. So this area of creativity. The next one is originality. Originality in law is measured by you know, as someone mentioned there, it's substantial similarity. So plagiarism is how we measure originality, by what it doesn't infringe. And that's all we have to do is see Ed Sheeran sit in a courtroom, I think it's in New York, like yesterday and today, saying, hey, like, I didn't, you know, I'm getting fed up of this. Like, I'm being sued because I'm successful. And do you really think I'll get up in front of 20,000 people? Point being, you know, there's only so many chords, so many notes, how much is there? But then we get all that kind of weird stuff that we had with Blurred Lines and Dark Horse, where genres and certain tropes within music are being copyrighted. And this is where we are in danger when it comes to AI, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of concern about the slippery slope of bad copyright law and those, as Paul McCartney said, they nicked from everybody. That's how you learn. That's how you make music. I think it's a little bit different when it's a computer, and we have to think about this because the computer is making an exact copy of the other creator's work and feeding it into the system. And I don't think that that's the human creative process, is not to start by making a perfect copy and going from there.
Yeah, but it's more creative than putting together a phone book.
Yes.
And so that's the law. The other part that we always have to just always bear in mind is that when it comes to intellectual property, of which copyright is one of the forms of expression of that, generally speaking, throughout the world, it has to be made by a human. And thankfully, we have enough rulings about that to distinguish that non-humans, for instance, the monkey selfies being a good case, but also even in the UK, if in 1988, the Copyright and Designs Patent Act is one of the few ones that says it, and that's with 80s technology. It's the person who pushes the button, person who puts the means of action in place. So we're covered for the time being, but we shouldn't be complacent. There are a lot of pushes coming from a lot of other industries, not in music, that are curious and feel that giving AI the right to intellectual property would drive innovation. And those arguments are not easily dismissed. So we could have a lot of unintended consequences.
Wow. Yeah, that's a scary thought, though, for people who make a living being creatives in the music industry.
Yeah,
so might be a lot harder. I mean, you and I both believe that there's a path here, and that path is to use AI. And this is what we've talked about with our initiative that called AI OK, and that's, you know, really enabling the use of AI to fuel human creativity.
Yeah.
And
so let's talk a little bit about that. Okay. So we hear a lot about ethics. Ethics in music, you know, they're strange bedfellows. Okay. It just doesn't sound right. And ethics is something that for a lot of people just sounds like doing the right thing. Not that there's anything wrong about doing the right thing, but it can sound quite boring. Let's be clear. What does ethics mean? Ethics means that I came to ethics because I realized that the law was a busted flush, more or less. I think that's pretty much the way it is. And so where do we turn to? So we turn to the notions of what is the common good, even though that's in law. What is it that we care about? Personally, what I cared about was the fact that, to go back to the beginning of this, I've had multiple jobs throughout my life working in music. I don't really want to see that go. Maybe that's the kind of the dream of an old man, but I don't think it's something that they might be new jobs. So what does that mean? Do we care about people, humans being employed generally? And if we do in music specifically, then what would we need to do to ensure that the money that's generated, and we've got to bear in mind at the time when people are having the hardest time through making this industry based on copyright, and copyright itself is at an all-time high, how do we encourage that? So I thought about it, and I kind of thought maybe if there was some way that we could identify products and services that worked towards that ethical concern, that ethical area. And David, you know, I approached you 2 years ago with this idea of AI OK, and you quite rightfully said that's a great idea, but there is no way that's going to work. And I left it because I went around the industry and brought it to a lot of high places. A number of people like Scott Cohen at Warner's thought it was a good idea, like you, but said, you're going to have to find someone to pay for this. And in fairness, you were the one who helped to bring that out of the bin, because when the weather, the mood started changing back in October, when you said, you know, I think there might be something in this, that's when I thought, okay, maybe there's an appetite. So that idea of a way of identifying what are good actors and who defines the good actors, well, not me, but stakeholders within the business, within the industry, across the board, can define what it is that they care about. And a way, if we can identify then who are good and bad actors, and that's why it has a positive idea of this AI OK, then I believe that shareholders and consumers and user-generated consumers will want to do the right thing. And what does that mean? Well, while a lot of people are having fun making fake Drakes, there's a lot of people going, hang on a minute, you cool with that? Like, Grimes is cool with it, but is Drake cool with that? And if Drake's not cool with that, then get out of here. And that kind of sense of community, I believe, can be really, really bring forward. I'm looking at this. So David, I was drawn to the chat room too.
Yeah, I know. But we're talking about likenesses and owning your voice and so on and so forth. And yeah.
Well, the good news is you do own the right to your own voice. The bad news is that currently with the technology that we have, to completely create a facsimile of your voice and my voice, we only need 3 seconds. That's our talking voice. I haven't tried it with singing voices, which is a more complex medium. So maybe it might take a bit longer, but we don't necessarily need huge training sets, would be my sense of that. I'm super bullish, absolutely. Will it be signed away to the record companies? Yeah, I think we can, to Leon's question there, if it's Leon, in the future, do you think singers will own their own voice, or will it be signed away to record company labels? Yeah, okay. A good example of that we've seen is from sports, so personality rights. We've seen how they were bundled, publicity rights were bundled, not personality rights, publicity rights were bundled into sports deals.
Yep.
And we've seen the advent of the 360 deal, certainly for superstars. That's a good idea. Not so good for smaller artists because of cross-collateralization, but we know about that. Yeah, like if something is valuable, then absolutely.
But in a sense, that's part of what the artist is bringing to the table. And if they're getting a big advance or a bigger share of the money because they're willing to let a label, in this case, monetize it for them, you know, your label deal is only as good as the deal you negotiate.
Yeah, and your label deal is for us technology, which is recorded music, that, you know, is changing. To Maureen's point there, she just made the thing about Imogen Heap, putting their artists in charge of their data. Absolutely. Holly Herndon, who wrote a chapter in the book, or I interviewed for the book, developed Holly Plus. I suggest anybody who's interested in seeing that looks at her TED Talk from last April, where she in detail recorded all of the expressions of her voice, and now you can sing in that manner. There's a company I'm speaking to tomorrow, I know, for a new startup. So there's a lot of people who are working probably in this field where in real time, you'll be able to sing, you know, with anybody's voice that you want. And I think we can also look towards Apple's Sing technology, where they were able to knock out the vocals before Christmas, to see how those things could join in a kind of scary way where you could sing as Elton John on a David Bowie song, or become Drake on a Grimes track, though I'm not sure what the legalities of that would be. But technically, these things are feasible. So they need to be brought inside of the tent. And that's what you and I are working on with AIOK, in fact.
So, you know, people are still probably pretty fuzzy on what AIOK is. So let's try to give them a couple of examples of what this initiative would be about. We had the human creativity, a human artistry campaign, human artistry campaign, and they came up with their principles.
Yep.
And many of those principles are sort of what AIOK is looking at. And that's the equitable remuneration, recognition, moral rights, all those things for the creators, for human creators. And if that means putting some kind of labeling or logo on music, the way that we have non-GMO or fair trade coffee, that's one way to do it. If it's putting a logo on a service because it's taken licenses for the human creations that they're trained on, that's another option. But there's another aspect of AIOK that's really important that you touched on, which is that in concept, we would want to create like a board, and this board of governance would be parties that have a vested interest in seeing that this happens, and try to come up with a rule set for what is, a couple of people put in the chat, bad AI. And there are some bad AI, even in the generative music space. I think if your purpose is just to rip off somebody else's creations and profit from it, most of us would agree that's bad AI. But if you're good AI, maybe there's a way to be recognized for being good AI. And that's part of what we're trying to achieve with this group.
And we're not alone, thankfully. So we should mention that we can't mention names right now, but there's a couple of big tech companies who are not necessarily in this space, but are associated with AI, who have seen the light and coming on board. And we have been speaking to industry for quite some time now. And hopefully they will come on board. I think there's a general willingness now, though, to go, okay, there's a problem. Is there a positive solution that is meaningful? One of the things that I'm particularly excited about in relation to this idea of AIOK is that it's capable of dealing with new problems as they emerge in real time. And we are talking about 2 or 3 things. So if we look at the questions, like for instance, Tom just said there about, what about DSPs drowning in too much AI generated content? That's a huge issue. Yeah. And we're only touching the surface of that. So numbers, we were at a conference last week where they were talking about the numbers. Someone mentioned in the chat room there 1 million tracks a day. Yeah, I mean, to get a sense of that, you've just got to think about how many photographs are put up, or videos are put up on YouTube on a regular basis, and say, what if that was music? What would it mean? Well, it would mean that streaming sites, which they celebrated, let's do some numbers. So streaming sites doesn't feel that long ago celebrated Spotify and Apple Music. 100 million tracks was now in their. I was chatting to Maureen at DDEX, and I mentioned BandLab. BandLab is a DAW, a recording studio in the browser that's free to use. During COVID, just after COVID last year, 16 million people joined that, registered with it. On average, they came up with 4 tracks each. So 4 tracks by 16 million is 240 tracks. That's 2.5 times the current history of all the recorded music that's on Spotify. That's one new system. And yes, there's some AI involved, but we're looking at huge proliferation of music. The 38% of music that was unlistened to on Spotify last year, even once, that nobody's mum or friend or even the artist listened to, the sheer cost of the data centers to store all of this unlisted, unlistened to music, like, what are we going to do with all this music? And I believe we're going to have a lot of fun with it. But we've got to make sure that we still have an industry, that people are employed. And we need to do that quickly. And we need to do that with imagination and not with fear, but with curiosity, and take the lead. One of the great things about being in the canary in the coal mine, right, is No disrespect to the canary, but the miners can get out. Okay? There's no point sitting there when the canary's fallen off its perch going, oh, what happened to little Rosie? Rosie being the name of the canary. Do you know what I mean? You want to go, hey, I think it's time to take lunch. Let's get out of here. And don't light that cigarette. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we're talking about canaries in coal mines and movies.
Back to impact on movies.
Yeah.
Okay, quick one for you there. I saw the Russo brothers, the guys who directed the Avengers, and they were saying that they were at a Marvel thing, and they said, yeah, it's going to be crazy. In 2 years, right, you're going to be able to make your own movie. And that's a very interesting prediction, right? Even if that's off by 5 years, they are making the most successful movies. They did like Captain America, The Winter Soldier. They're pretty good. They're using the high-end CGI, you know, lots of copyright material. If that can be brought in, it can be monetized, and it can be really exciting. Again, what do you get if you get 100 movies? He said, what you want to do is you come home, he said, I have an avatar of me, I've had a hard day, I get an avatar, and I'm quoting from him, of Marilyn Monroe, and I want to watch a rom-com of me and Marilyn for the evening because I had a hard day. Now, that's kind of sad in some respects, but in one sense, do you know what I mean? But if that's your thing, you know, you just want to make sure that Marilyn's a state, and, you know, and that it's a rom-com. It stays a rom-com.
Yeah, my concern about that one is that, you know, I can go to a paint supply, I can go to an art supply store and I can buy the same paints and the same canvas that Renoir used, but it doesn't make me a master painter. And so when you put these tools in the hands of lots of people, most of the stuff, the same way that the music that's being generated by AI prompts, let's say, you know, what are the chances of any of that being masterpieces? I mean, it's the monkeys typing Shakespeare, right?
No, it's, and sadly what it is not monkeys. It's like if we go back to technology, music technology, it's like the saxophone. The saxophone was a joke instrument. Nobody wanted it. It ended up in, you know, pawnbrokers. Eventually it makes its way to John Coltrane. A faulty valve is something you want to get fixed. My God, your speaker sounds like it's got crackle in it. Somebody goes, I like that crackle. I like that crap. That leads to Jimi Hendrix creating a whole new way of expressing himself through feedback. I can go on. Bing Crosby, multi-track recordings, chiptune. It's a question of taste. There will always be the established masters who've used the traditional arts, but let's not forget that one of the ways that art in the history of art reacted to the invention of photography. So if you look at the history of, say, Turner, you'll see that Turner was a realistic painter, heavily influenced by Rembrandt, and then some whippersnapper came up with this thing called a photograph, and they were out of business. So the painters sat around, they were going, you know, what are we going to do? We made a living from developing our art to create this level of realism. We've just managed to create this wonderful level of realism, and this piece of technology that any fool can use has now replaced us. So they reinvented a whole new language.
Wow. Yeah.
That may happen. But, you know, here's the thing. And Howie could speak a lot more about this than me, but one thing I've always identified is this idea of time lag. So if something is invented, it gets kicked around and reinvented. You know, it was 100 years from the invention of the turntable in whatever that was, roughly, you know, the phone, 80 ago, right? Until, you know, Cool L Herc in the Bronx started doing his scratching. So we're talking about, was that like late mid-70s is when he first invented that.
80 years, 90 years, yeah.
Yeah, so we haven't got 80, 90 years. We probably, 90 days, that kind of time frame, months before this stuff can change. And that's why this revolution needs to be industrialized, to kind of put a bent on Gil Scott-Heron's thing about that. And we can do it, but we won't do it by the way that we responded to Napster. And we won't do it by going, this is my ground, I have my job. Because one thing about AI that's very good at doing is replacing certain skill sets. And so everything that's occurring is bring it in the house, employ humans, figure out how we make it work, and have fun with it. That's my basic. Have we managed to lose everybody, or is anybody still with us?
No. We still got lots of people, but we do have to wrap it up. But as one of the people that may or may not have dropped already, was my old colleague and one of my best friends at Sony Music, Matt Carpenter, said, he's been trying to tell all the executives that he works with in the music industry, do you want to drive the bus or do you want to get run over by the bus?
Yeah.
I think he's a little optimistic about driving the AI bus, but we should at least be on the bus, not under it. That's why I think that's the message that I would like to get out to people.
Or throwing people under the bus. That's the other side. Right?
Or having a machine throw the people under the bus. Yeah.
And I do think it's there. The idea of, like, one of the things that I think we're beginning to see is that there's the change from fear to proactive, and that's not just wishful thinking, though it is wishful thinking. I do wish for that to happen. For instance, there was a story I saw the other day about a band that were managed to, say, translate their work into tons of different languages. And if we consider that on a broad level, that's definitely increasing your market share at a time when historically over the last 10 years, English has stopped being like the lingua franca of the most popular songs in the world. And markets like France, for instance, like the same thing would apply. India is now the biggest country in the world. Like, people still love music. And this is the key part about this. For as long as people still love making music and still listening to music, AI doesn't listen to music in the way that we listen to it. And so just keeping that pulse of protection of how we figure out to keep work going, not necessarily new jobs we've got, but other jobs that can come. And that's why I think that this idea of recognizing those efforts is going to be key. And I think that shareholders and consumers and musicians and pretty much everybody who cares about music is going to quickly identify with this. And then we've got to figure out solutions. And that's where your team of experts comes in, because, Hey, Tom, you're looking very serious.
Okay. Well, I think we've gone over our time enough, so we'll turn it back to Tom and let him wrap it up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this. David and Martin, I look a little serious because, frankly, I don't understand a lot about this. I just realize, as a music industry executive, if we address this the same way we did Napster, we are all collectively screwed worse than Napster ever screwed us. And so I hope that we will lean into this, license this, leverage this, monetize this, as opposed to try to legislate out of this, because that can't happen.
The genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah, and won't go back. So, folks, that's a discussion for another day. And I'd love to have these two experts on maybe a few months down the road, because guaranteed that this topic is going to evolve quickly and in some crazy places in that interim. To the audience, thank you for your continued patronage here. You got a treat today from two geniuses, and there's more coming next week. With that, I'll sign off with my customary sign off, and that is be nice to each other, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, Tom.
And thanks for all the great questions. I'm sorry if we missed any of them.
We couldn't answer all of them, but we'll try next time. Thank you.
Cheers.